Hey guys, so if you remember in our last video, we talked about robber barons and how they really begin to kind of shape America because while they're building factories and they're expanding into new technologies and they're incorporating things like the assembly line, they also were kind of having unchecked power. I mean, it's not until the Sherman Antitrust Act that really the government begins to kind of stand up and say, you don't really have unlimited freedom. And it's because of this and because of early things like the Grange and the Populist Party that you're going to start to have pushback. And that pushback is going to come in the form of labor unions. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. And so our discussion today is on labor unions and their influence. And so your notes need to have this listed as power to the people. And because that's really what the idea of the labor unions is that we're stronger together than we are separate. And so workers are going to begin to unite. Now, one of the things that you really need to make sure that you remember is that although many businessmen prospered at this time, factory workers often faced really long hours, low pay, unhealthy conditions. And at this time, factory workers were not only adults, but also children as well. And as automation increased and skilled labor was less necessary, workers saw themselves becoming part of a machine, and many bosses treated them as such and had little care about what happened to them during the daily grind of their workday. Although unions and trade guilds had existed before, they grew in size and scope during this time. The first national union, the Knights of Labor, was founded in Philadelphia in 1869. Originally established as a secret society to protect its members from employer retaliation, the organization went public under the leadership of a guy by the name of Terence V. Powderly in the 1880s. Unlike most unions, the Knights of Labor welcomed women, African Americans, and unskilled laborers, but Asians were often excluded. With its large membership, the Knights tried to use the tactic of what is known as collective bargaining to secure pay equality and other workplace rights. Just kind of a side note about collective bargaining. It's the idea of workers acting together or collectively it's the essence of a union. If you join a union today, that is exactly what you do because it gives the workers the power to convince the management to make a compromise. Remember, the idea is you are stronger together than you are apart. In 1886, Samuel Gompers founded the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, a coalition of smaller unions and skilled workers, becoming a much more influential organization. The AFL is still around today. Eventually, it will merge with another group we'll talk about later called the CIO, and they will now be known as the AFL-CIO, and they're one of the largest labor organizations in the country. So this time of the Gilded Age really becomes marked by strikes by these labor unions. They're starting to get more power and influence, and although strikes sometimes helped unions fight business, they also sometimes damaged the reputation of these unions, some of which came to be seen as violent anarchists or people opposed to government or law and order. This was often a smear tactic used by anti-union business owners who really wanted to kind of demonize the unions. Some of the important strikes of this time, one is, and probably the most influential, is the Haymarket Affair. It happened in Chicago, Illinois in 1886. When the McCormick Harvester Company hired strike-breaking workers, a scuffle followed, killing a union member. Those strike-breaking workers are known as scabs. If you cross the line and you go work for a company during a strike, you're known as a scab. And unions are very against scabs because it really undermines their argument. This led to a protest at Haymarket Square in which several civilians and 8 policemen were killed, and public opinion really turned against the strikers during this. The Homestead Strike happened in Homestead, Pennsylvania in 1892, and it was at Andrew Carnegie's Homestead Steel Mill. A strike led to a fight that resulted in 10 deaths. The state militia was called in to break up that strike, and again, it really kind of ended up making the strikers take most of the blame and the brunt of the public outrage, rather than the business owners themselves and the reason why the workers were fighting or striking. The Pullman Strike happened in Pullman, Illinois in 1894, and when Eugene Debs, the president of the American Railway Union, led a strike at the Pullman Palace Car Company over pay cuts. President Grover Cleveland actually got involved and called in soldiers to put an end to the strike, which had shut down many railroads across the countries. Debs went to prison, but not for long, and the strike really ended, and it set precedent for the first time of, again, the government getting involved in business issues, business affairs. While Grover Cleveland's tactics might seem to be more geared towards business, the idea and his argument was, I have to get involved because the railroads are shutting down, and that actually will hurt the U.S. economy and hurt the rest of the people who live here rather than help them. So that's it. We're going to talk a lot more about unions in class, and we'll talk a lot more about unions as we kind of go on, because it's really the differences between the difference that we have today, the safety conditions, the work hours, things like that, are really because of unions, and then eventually, really petitioning their business owners to give them better working conditions, but also petitioning the government to change the way we do things. It's really because of them that we have a lot of the things we do today, like the 8-hour workday and a living wage. In America today, we still have unions, and they still play an important part of not only the industrial sector, but also white-collar jobs, like teachers, for instance, often have unions to collectively bargain and work together to kind of make better working conditions for themselves and create better environments for their students. So what you need to make sure you have in your notes today is 2 potential essay questions about unions. Maybe it's about the Knights of Labor. Maybe it's about Eugene Debs and who he is. Or maybe you're going to talk about the working conditions at the time during the time we spoke of. So have those 2 at the bottom of your notes. Also, any other questions or comments you might have, please put them in the margins of your notes so that way we can talk about them tomorrow when we go over this again in class. And that's really it. The biggest things you need to know of: the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, the Knights of Labor, and those 3 big strikes that kind of turned disastrous for the strikers, and the unions. Those are the major things you need to make sure you remember. Until next time, have a great rest of your day, and I will see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.